Rob.
Hello.
We got somebody new. Hello, Aaron. Hello, Ryan.
Hello.
We'll wait a couple more minutes before we get started. Let's wait like 2 minutes. All right, Rob, you ready to get going?
All right. Yeah, so we are meeting to cover the second half of the resolutions, which we have divided. And we're also going to cover proposed changes to the DSA's constitution. There are 8 of those. We're also talking about the other half of the resolutions, which we've divided into 2 additional categories, one of which is electoral policy changes that have been proposed. But first, we are going to discuss the, I've forgotten what we called this group of them.
Class struggle.
Class struggle, yes.
All right. So yeah, here's a rundown of the ones that we kind of deemed having to do with class struggle. There's some overlap with some other things, I would say. that we talked about last time, and maybe some we'll talk about later, but I think they kind of fit together in a way. So the first one is the mass campaign for voting rights. And this is about creating a national campaign committee to advance voting rights and access across all 50 states, districts, and US territories. And they listed a whole bunch of different things that they'd be working towards. I listed a few of them: restoring and expanding Section 5 of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, requiring international observers in US elections, establishing independent voting district commissions in each state, ensuring voting rights for the formerly and currently incarcerated, and then also establishing Election Day as a national holiday, automatic voter registration, and eliminating voter ID laws, early voting, including 2 weekends before the elections, continuing to offer robust mail-in voting options through USPS after the end of the pandemic, and demand a process to naturalize undocumented immigrants immediately and to offer citizenship to all undocumented immigrants who seek it. So those are the kinds of things that this committee would be working to advance. And then this resolution also demands or proposes that DSA provides resources to its chapters to create these campaigns. And then also providing material support to voters on election day to ensure that no one is deterred from exhaustion or disability by serving as election observers and doing things like escorting marginalized groups to the polls and reporting intimidating tactics, such as racist vigilantes in coordination with relevant working groups and coalition partners. So this one seems to be pretty popular. I think we're all pretty aware that there's like a systematic attack on voting rights right now. May have seen today, Joe Manchin said he would vote down the what's it called, the We the People Act. Is that correct, Rob? So I think that this one has a lot of popular support right now. The total cost for it is over $37,000 a year. One thing we talked about last time, if you weren't able to be here, is that we don't have a lot of money, and basically we're already at a deficit. So everything that they're proposing, we would have to come up with funds for. We'd have to do a lot of fundraising. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as we go through these. So the next one is a really big one. It's called Building Worker Power to Win Democratic Socialism, a labor strategy for DSA in 2001 and 2000 to 2023. From what I understand, at the last convention, there were several different labor strategy type resolutions that were proposed and passed, and they didn't all necessarily like cohere or go together. And then they were just passed and like left a lot of people to figure out how they went together. I think this time, from what I understand, people from several different caucuses participated on putting together like a singular strategy, and this is it. It's the big one. And I really liked how it was laid out, but basically it's recommitting. Sorry. No, it's recommitting to make labor, the Democratic Socialist Labor Commission, a top priority for DSA. And it really like kind of explained all the parts of it, of what it wants to do. It covers organizing the unorganized and passing the PRO Act. As we know, that's been a big campaign that's been going on within DSA over the last couple of months. And it's really given us I think, an opportunity to flex some organizing power. And I think it's a vehicle for future campaigns. So they want to keep building off of that and continuing to try to pass it. Because I think everybody knows what the PRO Act is, but essentially it removes legal and structural barriers to unionization. So that's one plank of it. Another is trying to organize within Amazon, organizing within our own workplaces. The DSLC, I believe, is the Democratic Socialist Labor Commission. From what I understand, I think it's the like labor working group, or the DSA body that organizes behind labor causes. So okay. Also included in this is one of the headings was build, democratize, and transform our unions, support reform efforts, and movement-oriented unionism. So this is basically talking about how DSA should be supporting organized efforts of rank and file workers inside and outside of DSA to transform their unions into militant democratic vehicles of and for the multiracial working class at work, in the community, and in the political arena. And then also just a push to organize more. It talks about how socialists and unions should aspire to become activists and like leaders within their unions. So that could include shop floor organizing, bargaining, contract enforcement, and when possible, contesting for formal leadership. And I think it said in there that something like there's 10,000 DSA members who are in unions. So just talking about trying to bump that number up. And then another interesting thought, an interesting thing that it included was supporting members and building worker power by taking initiative to politicize the workplace by going beyond bread and butter issues and tying workplace demands to whole community demands and campaigns, and continuing to build possibilities for experimental solidarity. And then continuing to strengthen the Labor Commission. And then also adding a staffer dedicated to Democratic Socialist Labor Commission. I'm trying to see if there's anything else here I wanted to mention. This one was endorsed by the Collective Power Network Caucus and the Bread and Roses Caucus and the Socialist Majority Caucus. So a lot of people from different caucuses working to try to build the best labor strategy we can together, which is something that's good to see. And I just pulled a quote from it because there's a lot that I liked, and it says, it kind of sums everything up where it says, labor organizing is not just about fighting our individual employers. The labor movement needs to become a movement of millions of people taking militant action to win broader demands, from the Green New Deal to Medicare for all and beyond, on behalf of all working people. Socialists must work together across the labor movement to help develop militant, democratic, member-led unions and help unify them into a powerful movement capable of challenging and eventually overturning capitalism. And as I said, this is a big one. This is one of the more expensive ones you'll see. I think it might, maybe this is like the max they can ask for. I'm not sure on that. I don't think they provide a definition within that specific one. But yeah, this one is over 730 grand a year for this one. So I think that this one has a lot of support. Like the last one, this one has a lot of support, and people are, I would be very surprised if this was not passed. Okay, so the next one is the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal priority. And in 2019, at the 2019 convention, they established the Green New Deal as a national priority, pushing to decarbonize all sectors of the US economy by 2030, democratize control of major energy systems and resources through public ownership, center the working class in a just transition to a caring economy with a job guarantee that expands the public sector, decommodifying, all these things that we talk about with the Green New Deal. And something I didn't know was that in 2020, in fall of 2020, there was a Green New Deal strategy summit, and members from 60 different chapters affirmed DSA's most strategic near-term Green New Deal campaign as a green public bailout with a jobs guarantee and public power. So this they've been kind of trending in this direction. And what this one would do is reauthorize and endorse the Green New Deal campaign as one of DSA's highest national priorities, which is in line with DSA's guiding principles for a Green New Deal. Yeah, I kind of went through that. What it does is prioritize organizing for climate infrastructure legislation as the key terrain of socialist organizing. That would include demanding a green stimulus oriented by the principles of democratic public ownership and public investment and designed to benefit workers and communities, not green capitalists, and organizing around non-reformist reforms like public ownership of the energy system, construction of millions of units of green social housing, federal support for massive expansions in green public transit, and a Green New Deal for public schools. And then also saying that political programs will align with DSA's many chapter level public power and Green New Deal campaigns. I kind of already went through that. And then it would also expand the Green New Deal campaign committee. This is another big one. Again, I think it seems pretty popular. I think similar to the labor one, this is one that a lot of different people have worked together on. I can't remember who has endorsed it, but I think it's a pretty popular one. It's the Green New Deal. It's the eco-socialist resolution. And that would be over almost 240 grand a year. Okay, so then the next couple are about international solidarity. And there's been some controversy on some of them. The one after this is more controversial than this one. But this one is called Committing to International Socialist Solidarity. This begins the process of developing election observers. And so this is about responsibilities of responsibilities and priorities for the International Committee. So beginning the process of developing election observer delegations to be sent to other countries, specifically throughout the Americas on a regular basis, and developing exchange programs with mass parties in other countries to share knowledge and build relationships within the international left, continuing efforts to establish relationships with mass parties of the Latin American left, including like, I think that's already covered, and prioritizing chapter and member development through building chapter toolkits that support local internationalist work, and prioritizing chapter and member development through building chapter toolkits. All right, I have that one twice, that's my bad. And then also DSA will apply for membership within the Sao Paulo Forum, which from what I understand is like a conference. Do you know much about this one, Rob? Okay, I think it's a conference of like leftist organizations in other countries, I think specifically in like Latin America. I don't know as much about that, but that was part of it, so I included it. And then this one would be over 81 grand. And then the next one is called the Internationalist Principles, Political Education and Solidarity. This is the one that took me the longest to kind of wrap my arms around. Trying to think how to start with this one. Probably the best way is to go to the bottom where I've got Rob's analysis. When I asked Rob earlier today how he sums it up, and he says this one commits International Committee to a concept of critical support, which implicitly means asserting that the International Committee can fairly evaluate political arrangements in other countries. So this one's pretty meaty. I think to expand on that, I should just take it at their word. So it says left-wing and social democratic forces contend for or hold state power to the extent that they embrace the demand for the liberation of oppressed and indigenous peoples and pursue a redistributive. Sorry, I can't see the chat when I'm doing it. Okay. DSA extends critical defense to these movements, parties, and governments to the extent that these forces remain committed to a pro-worker program of liberation, equality, and democracy. We likewise offer those parties and governments to our critical defense and solidarity. Critical support for left governments or other governments defending themselves from imperialism means conditional support, which implies being able to evaluate and analyze the dynamics on the ground, robust political, and then basically that what they want to do, in addition to this like internationalist principle of who we should and shouldn't support, developing political education to basically inform membership of why the International Committee made these decisions. And then it commits staff and funding for political education, including presentations, study groups, and organized discussions and debates about imperialism, anti-imperialism, and international solidarity. So this one's very controversial. A lot of the discussion has to do with China and people arguing over what's socialist and what's not socialist and what governments and regimes we should support and which ones we should support but have criticisms of, and what governments we shouldn't ever criticize. And I had one more thing on that. A lot of people thinking that we shouldn't be the ones to make this call. Rob, do you want to clarify anything I said there?
Yeah, from what I've seen, the major opposition is premised on the idea that there are always going to be gaps in our knowledge for what's going on in another country, especially because the news that we get out of other countries is shaded through the lens of corporate media, and also the active or passive interference of the foreign policy apparatus of the US government, including intelligence agencies, but not just that. There's the way the State Department will interpret goings on in other countries. So the resolution itself mentions DSA's previous support for the solidarity movement in Poland, and then the retraction of support from solidarity after the government of Poland under solidarity enacted the same sort of neoliberal reforms that we saw throughout the rest of the Western world from the 80s onwards. So this has been criticized as a sort of Cold War kind of thinking resolution, to where and some members of the International Committee specifically accused this of trying to undo the reforms of the International Committee, which I don't know that that's a fair criticism. But then the case for this resolution would be that, you know, we shouldn't lend rhetorical support to anyone that we see out there waving a red flag. You know, there are bad things going on in countries that are nominally socialist, specifically looking at police violence in China and whatever's going on in Xinjiang right now. But then also looking at things that are very much sort of deviations from what anyone would consider socialist in countries like Venezuela, and the you know, allegations of corruption at various socialist governments. And then you know, it also, there's a sort of unwillingness, I think, on the part of the people who are in favor of this resolution to they don't want to be seen to support bad regimes. I mean, you see online every time Chomsky is brought up, there's someone in the replies talking about his defense of the Khmer Rouge, and his unwillingness to believe the reports of the atrocities that were happening just because those reports were filtered through the even more concentrated corporate media channels that we had back then. Of course, those reports were true and there were hideous atrocities happening in Cambodia at the time, but there have been other times where horrendous atrocities have been reported, going all the way back through the history of mass media to where those atrocities have not been true or have been blown wildly out of proportion. Like the earliest instance of that I can think of is the horror stories about like German atrocities in World War I in Belgium. And while the Germans weren't exactly, the most polite people walking through Belgium, they didn't have like a systematic plan to exterminate the Belgian people in that war. So that's kind of a broad overview of the controversy around this resolution.
Yes, and thank you, Rob. I think that price is wrong. I think that I included that from the last one. I think this one actually is 0. So sorry about that, but yeah, this one is more about the controversies over the principles, not like the investment in resources. Okay, so then the next one is the class struggle on the housing terrain, building power in the tenants movement. This is about strengthening ties to growing tenant movement across the country, building and supporting tenant unions. It has like a specific structure of how they want to go about this. And this is the National Political Committee and the Housing Justice Commission developing this structure with 3 distinct wings. And the first wing is responsible for building and running a train the trainer program that teaches comrades how to build new autonomous tenant unions or teach chapters how to collaborate with existing autonomous tenant unions. The next wing is responsible for conducting research into local conditions of legal resource availability and obstacles to access, and developing a guide for tenant unions to connect with legal support networks and organize outside the legal system. And then the last wing is responsible for political education relevant for the tenant movement, developing a political education curriculum that could be adapted to local conditions. And then it also included this part about how tenant unions should be able to affiliate or should apply to affiliate with or be affiliated with the National Autonomous Tenant Union Network, which has emerged as a national center for actually existing socialist tenant movements. And this is another big one. It's over 715,000 a year. And I believe this was one of the communist caucuses that did this one, but I can't remember which one it was. I think there's like 4. And that's about what I know about that one. Do you know anything else about that one, Rob? No, okay. Okay. The next one is DSA for $25 an hour. It just remarks how the federal minimum wage is not kept pace with inflation, declining from $10.15 in 1968 to $7.25 today being 2018 dollars, and the minimum wage had kept pace with increase in worker productivity. It would be approximately $21.25. So this one's kind of interesting because the first part of it is about supporting an increase to a federal minimum wage to $25 an hour, but most of it has to do with how DSA pays employees and staffers. So the next one is about how beginning in 2023, DSA shall not pay any employee less than $25 an hour or $52,000 a year for full-time work, but the clause shall not impact any current collective bargaining agreements. And I found it kind of interesting that there's not a lot of specifics for how it would go about this $25 an hour like national campaign, but there's a lot about how it would pay within the organization. So it seems a little deceptive, but it didn't put, so it says like, they basically want to invest in paying employees $25 an hour, but it put no total cost for the resolution. So take of that what you will. The next one is for childcare for all. Childcare for all initiatives are popular, deeply felt public good organizing effort that address both the safety and socialization of children, as well as the pay and conditions of workers in these programs. This resolution proposes putting staffing behind this initiative with a half-time staffer that will craft the necessary universal childcare tax mechanisms that will change children's lives and level income inequality in America. So basically it lays out what the half-time staffer will be responsible for. So this person will facilitate a consciousness raising campaign to bring up awareness of the socialist strategy for locals interested in working toward universal childcare through childcare for all campaigns. They'll be hired within 6 months of the convention, and they will be paid at least a medium income of childcare workers in America and be granted an additional 10 grand that will go towards resources and training for interested locals to help get childcare for all canvassing campaigns off the ground. And this one would be over 37 grand a year. And then the last one of this kind of class struggle group of resolutions is the Medicare for All one, which is called the Medicare for All Committee Convention Recommendations. And let me see what else there is in addition to what I have on here. Basically, this is reaffirming Medicare for All as a national priority campaign within DSA. And it talks about how it wants to continue the Medicare for All movement. And some of the things they listed was helping chapters build local and statewide campaigns to push Medicare for All movement forward through strategic local campaigns, especially those that link health justice to racial justice, as well as the broader Medicare for All movement, getting as many U.S. representatives and senators as possible to sign on to the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act and the Medicare for All bills by carrying out independent local pressure campaigns, electing Medicare for All legislators, organizing protests and demonstrations aimed at insurance, pharmaceutical, and other for-profit healthcare institutions, winning local municipal resolutions for Medicare for All, and building labor support for Medicare for All by supporting the formation of the Health Workers Collective. And like some of the other ones I mentioned earlier, like the labor one and like the Green New Deal one, I believe this is the only resolution that's specifically about Medicare for All. Actually, both of those that I mentioned Medicare for All within them, and I think maybe it's the abolitionist one, which we talked about last time, also mentions Medicare for All. But this is the Medicare for All resolution, and it's a big one. It's like as much as we would invest in resources in a year, which would be over 732 grand a year. So that is all I had for the ones that we deemed class struggle related resolutions. So I will turn it over to Rob for the more electoral based ones.
All right. Was there any discussion of those resolutions before we move on to the electoral?
Yeah, sure, we can do that first.
I'm curious to, I guess, two things. They're putting prices or amounts on these, and I'm curious what's the national DSA's current budget, and do any of these resolutions come along with a fundraising plan?
On the fundraising plan, no, they do not. I'm not sure about the DSA's total budget.
My understanding was that we don't really have much of one right now. Was that your understanding, Rob?
No, the most recent figures that I've been able to find, let me see here, are from the 2019 budget, where the organization collected like $2.3 million from dues. I would assume that that is more than that now. Yeah, it appears that the report is presented at the convention, so we'll have full figures then. But no, none of the resolutions have any sort of fundraising plans to them. They have specific kind of things that they want to get done, and it's implicitly left to the National Political Committee to sort out how to balance all of the priorities with the resources that the organization has.
Thank you. I mean, even the 2.3 million, this gives me an idea. You know, maybe it's 5 million now between dues and some other funding sources or something like that. But
yeah,
I'm just looking at some of these amounts. I'm like, if these all pass,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mentioned at the last one that, like, you know, we're used to, as socialists, arguing about how deficits don't matter, and I'm looking at all these totals like a fucking deficit hawk. There was somewhere that had a little bit more information about that, but I can't find it right now. So is that it? Thanks, Doug. Yeah, that's what I was talking about, how the budget currently has a projected deficit of $7,000 for 2021.
I have to imagine as well, like, you know, when each convention, like our priorities are like set, right? Like there's some things that we pass at conventions that have ongoing costs, like always, right? But like when if any like priorities change or anything like that, or certain things are restructured or whatever, I would imagine that that would also factor into, right? So some previous spending would be replaced by new spending, but I have absolutely no idea where that would be or how much you know that is, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Some things will be shifted around, but then also other things will just be brand new expenses, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's difficult to figure out, I think, with the information that we have. All right, I'll go back to sharing my screen.
okay.
Unless anybody else has something they want to say.
So there are a number of changes to electoral strategy, and you'll see there's a theme to a few of them. So let's start with tribune to the people and democratic discipline. This one is looking specifically at refining what class struggle elections means. So it requires people endorsed by the national organization to be DSA members and pledge to advance the national platform. It also mandates that they hire DSA members on their campaigns, and that their hires to those campaigns also pledge to advance the platform. It asks that elected officials who receive DSA endorsements meet quarterly with the relevant DSA leadership, which for someone who was, for instance, elected to the US House of Representatives, they would meet with the National Political Committee. Someone who was elected to like a municipal office would meet with the executive committee of their local chapter. This also mandates that those elected with DSA endorsements form a caucus that votes as a block. I think this was specifically drafted with the recent controversy in Chicago in mind, where the 7 DSA members did not vote as a block against Mayor Lightfoot's budget. But then also there have been a few times with the DSA members who are in the House of Representatives where they have not all voted together, or where a few of them have abstained from voting in the face of pressure from the rest of the Democratic caucus. And then failure to observe these disciplinary structures would result in the reversal of the candidate or elected officials' endorsement by DSA, and there's potentially suspension of their membership in DSA. Obviously, the good thing about this is that some more disciplined action on behalf or on the part of socialist legislators would be a very good thing. Unfortunately, this would not stop a legislator after they're elected from deciding that they're just not going to talk to us anymore and trusting the inertia of incumbency to keep them in office if they're not really committed to socialism. And this one costs nothing. So it's fairly straightforward in that regard. Next up, we have the socialist slate for the House. This is a fairly large resolution. It suggests, or it mandates, that DSA chapters starting next year recruit and run a slate of candidates for the US House of Representatives nationwide. That's 435 candidates all around the country being recruited and having campaign infrastructure provided by local DSA chapters. It tasks the National Political Committee, National Electoral Committee, and the chapters to set policy priorities, train candidates, provide infrastructure, and then it has the NPC and NEC select one or two high priority campaigns and support those candidates support the high priority campaigns to try and essentially mimic the strategy of Justice Democrats. And then also this resolution encourages supporting candidates independent of the two-party system. It tasks the NPC with working out how to coordinate all of this with local chapters. And then sets a process and criteria for candidate recruitment that closely mirrors the language in resolution number 6, which we just talked about. And then it mandates that candidates elected on this DSA slate take the salary of the average union worker in their district and donate the rest to other DSA campaigns, which are not necessarily political campaigns, but could be campaigns like the Campaign for the Green New Deal or Medicare for All. And then it also tasks the NPC to make sure that this plan complies with all relevant laws. So this is a lot of activity. It's not as expensive as some of the others that we've seen, but it's still 200 grand. So I think for me, from what I've been able to see of this, I mean, obviously, each one of these things, if you could wave a magic wand and make them happen, they're great. But it's a lot of work. It's asking chapters to do a lot of things that there may not be that much buy-in for. So it's risky in that regard, I believe. It also sets the NPC up to do a lot of work in addition to the work that they're already doing. So then resolution number 8, towards a mass party in the United States. It proposes that DSA prioritize electoral work for the next 2 years, and then use that to build the infrastructure for a working class party independent of the Democrats, while also continuing to use the Democratic Party's ballot line tactically when it's possible for socialists to win Democratic primaries. It mandates DSA to develop state-level organizations to run candidates for state legislatures, which many states that's already happening kind of independently of the NPC, and then commits chapters to building member skills to conduct victorious mass party campaigns, and reaffirms prior commitments to class struggle elections and empowering historically marginalized and hyper-exploited peoples, and our relations with the labor movement, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ causes, etc. And this whole thing would require 2 full-time people to pull off. And it is one of the more expensive ones at $760,000. So like with the previous 2 of them, it'd be great if this was something that we had behind us. An independent socialist workers party in the United States that had mass appeal would, yes, this is resolution number 8. Yeah, it would be very good to have all of this organization built, but it would be very difficult to build. Weird, because it's I'm seeing number 8. But this would be expensive, demand a lot of work from individual chapters, and I don't know how much buy-in it would be possible to get from chapters that don't already have an electoral organization built. So then next up, resolution number 9 to run 10 candidates independent of the Democrats in 2022. This resolution proposes that the National Political Committee and National Electoral Committee find 10 independent candidates to run outside the Democratic Party's ballot line in 2022. DSA endorsed candidates can still run on the Democratic Party ballot line, but these 10 have to be independent. So we can tactically contest Democratic primaries all we want, as long as we get 10 independents out there that the organization is supporting. But then we're also asking all elected officials from DSA, anyone who's received a DSA endorsement and won their election, to publicly support these independent candidates. So on the case for this resolution is that the Democrats clearly suck, and getting socialists elected independent of them would be a very good thing. The against case for this that I've been able to see is that, you know, around 30% of the public still identifies with the Democrats, and many municipal elections, such as those in Illinois, are nonpartisan. So if the national organization wanted to just endorse 10 people for the Chicago City Council, there's that taken care of, it, and this resolution really endorses nothing, really achieves nothing. When I read through this resolution, I did not see anything in it about partisan versus nonpartisan elections, which to me, subjectively, seems like a massive oversight. But maybe there will be amendments from the floor to clarify that this means running independent candidates against the Democrats. That would strengthen the language. But again, it seems like it's a first draft of solving a very large problem. So then, oh, absolutely, yes. Ballot access is a huge problem. So this is candidates' political message about the Democratic Party. This mandates that DSA endorsed candidates identify the Democratic Party as a party of capital and publicly and loudly run against the Democratic corporate establishment. This encourages supporters, this mandates that people running for public office who receive DSA endorsements encourage their supporters, which are staff and volunteers, and just anyone voting for them generally, to join DSA to create a mass democratic organization. This also asks people who have been elected with DSA endorsements to refuse to endorse corporate Democrats. This resolution does not guarantee that candidates who are loudly running against the Democratic Party establishment will get a DSA endorsement. The entire Republican Party runs against the Democratic Party's establishment all the time, and we generally would not endorse any of them. So on the good side, this does sort of get our message out as to why we can't just trust the Democrats to take care of things. And again, 30% of the public broadly identifies with the Democratic Party. And depending on how this is packaged, they may find this messaging alienating. So then next up, the campaign for a democratic socialist party. So this, similar to the working class party resolution before, begins a campaign to build support for a democratic socialist party. Part of this is growing DSA's membership to 150,000 members. It mandates that DSA produce educational materials on the need for a democratic socialist party, tasks the NPC to draft a report on the progress towards a democratic socialist party, and requires 2 full-time staff. This is a lot of work for the national organization to do, and that is reflected in the total cost, which is, again, one of the most expensive of these resolutions. So as with many of these, if we could just wave a magic wand and have that happen, I don't think there are that many people in DSA who would oppose all of this work getting done. It's just a question of whether it can be done in the timeline provided with the resources that the organization has at hand. And then Resolution 38, Socialist Horizon. This resolution reiterates class struggle elections and lays out criteria for DSA candidates seeking endorsements, which are very similar to the previous discussion of class struggle. The main one here, or the main thing that I've seen online about this resolution is that Shama Swant and some other members of Socialist Alternative who have joined DSA proposed an amendment to this that strengthens its language in terms of identifying the Democrats as a capitalist party, but then also mandates that those who are elected with DSA endorsements take the average worker's wage of their district as their salary and donate any excess to, I cannot remember off the top of my head if it's to DSA or to other campaigns, but that caused a bit of controversy because of the historical antagonisms between different tendencies within American socialism. So this resolution, I cannot remember what I said about what was good or not about it off the top of my head, but it's I didn't really have anything, I guess. So yeah, it's just broadly a refinement of previous things that we've done, and it would also cost nothing. So next up, we have constitutional changes, but are there any points anyone wants to discuss on the electoral resolutions before we move on?
I'll just make the comment that this will be a fun section during the convention because there's clearly a lot of hotly contested opinions present throughout all those resolutions. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
I was struck by how similar they all are, more so than how different they are, because they're all saying the same thing and just using slightly different language in terms of expressing what change they want to see.
Yeah, I see there's a slew of them that are like adamant about like not running on the Democratic Party ballot. Like, so the two, like the biggest divide I've seen between any of the resolutions is whether or not to ever run on the Democratic ballot line or not. I mean, even the one that's kind of like run 10 candidates, and as long as you have the 10 independents, that's fine. It's still like just trying to get that in there. So that's what I see the biggest divide being.
Brian or Blake, any observations before we move to the constitutional changes?
I don't have any at this time.
Yeah, I think Doug mostly covered a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing and people's reaction to what's ideal and what's realistic and what's the most intelligent or attainable path. Um, yeah, I guess just like different forms of breaks with the Democratic Party and whether or not now is the time, I guess. And I think there's a lot of good arguments. I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of good arguments that we're not really ready for that. And I don't know, it's cool to see the ambition though. I mean, it'd be really cool if we could run nationwide House races. I don't think we can right now.
I think that, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I changed my mind. I have a comment. This seemed to me like some of these requirements they're putting on candidates are kind of hostile, and I can see a lot of candidates, like, even though they might like align with their beliefs, just like that's just too much. It's a lot of requirements and extra hoops to jump through, and maybe just not seek DSA's endorsement. I don't know. My initial thought, anyway.
Yeah, no, that was something that occurred to me also reading through these, and especially if you apply the language that Socialist Alternative is proposing, I mean, it's a really high bar to clear to ask anyone to run for public office, and I mean, I can see why they want to do that, but I can also see the argument that that's too much.
Yeah, I just don't think we have the power yet. Like in 10 or 20 years, when we have 500,000 members and lots of success with running candidates, like maybe we can impose that then, or more tighter requirements on the conduct of who we are endorsees. But I don't know that we're there yet, unfortunately.
And related to
Yeah.
that, how do we? I don't know what kind of power we have over people who have already been elected. It's one thing to be like, this is the requirement right now to like become a DSA candidate, but I feel like it'd be kind of difficult to go backwards and be like, hey, candidates we've been supporting for the last 4 years or whatever, you now have to listen to us and do this. And I just like, it'd be cool if we could do that, but I
Yeah.
don't know how successful we would be in that. I don't think it's the right strategy.
Yeah, and I think some of this stuff, when you think about it too, like when you think about where the vast majority of membership is, like technically it's, population based and like urban, and that whole urban and rural thing comes up where, so like a huge portion of members live in these like, giant urban centers where they run their own candidates. So like, it's not too hard for candidates who come from DSA to follow those rules necessarily, because like that's their main primary focus anyway, if, it's true that it's coming directly out of the chapter. But for chapters like ours, yeah, it's like that's, it makes it pretty strict, which, we can debate, whether that's okay or not, but there's definitely a clearly big difference between cities and like big chapters and then smaller chapters like ours for that. But then on the second hand too, another thing to keep in mind is when it comes to this like budget versus, when it comes to this budget thing, another thing to keep in mind is that these resolutions also hold a political component. So like it's clear that like even if we pass half of them, maybe we won't have the budget to fund all of them, and it'll be a matter of prioritization amongst the NPC, but still it is also kind of setting the political tone as well, right? So let's say we passed one of those ones that like mandates not running as a Democrat, but also has a high cost, right? Like even if we can't afford it, like it still like sets that political component to our electoral strategy. So it does change it in that kind of way. So it's kind of hard to tell, like, I don't know. It's hard to tell what, what you should pick that doesn't meet the budget versus like what's a good political goal. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I wanted to say that.
Yeah, for me, this is my personal opinion on most of the electoral resolutions. They have at their core a misapprehension of the nature of electoral politics. And there's a classic discussion among the socialist left about what the correct role of contesting elections in a capitalist electoral system, what the role of that for the advance of socialism is. And the most coherent and appealing description of that I've found is that elections are ratifications of power that's been built. And if you look at the results of the last national elections that we had, we do not have enough power to justify, to me, the large amount of resources that many of these resolutions want to expend on electoral organizing. So then constitutional changes. So these,
All right.
most of them are
Sorry,
pretty,
it hasn't come up yet.
Ah.
There we go.
most of these are actually pretty straightforward. A lot of it's just right there in the name for it. So the first one is to strike regional requirements for national conventions. At present, national conventions have to move around the country to different regions. So our last one was in Atlanta. The one before that, I think, was in Chicago. They've been in Virginia, all around the country. And the reason for that was it was thought that allowing different chapters to host the national convention could potentially build those chapters up. It would be a way of bringing additional attention to local organizing in the city where the convention was held, and then it would just be a way of not overly favoring one chapter that hosts the national convention every year. Unfortunately, it has not been seen that allowing different locals to host the convention has really done anything for those local chapters. DSA national conventions, in the rationale of the constitutional changes, states basically there's no influx in membership for chapters that host the convention, because the convention is pretty much just DSA members and members of the press who are covering the convention. So this change allows the National Political Committee to decide where to host the convention and directs them to prioritize minimizing travel for delegates and travel costs. So the good thing about this one is that if it passed, pretty much guaranteed that Chicago is going to host the convention until the end of time, or St. Louis or somewhere else that's centrally located and not that far from us. So, I mean, as far as that goes, that's great. But also pretty much everywhere in the country that's centrally located, and Chicago specifically in August, it's not the best place to be on earth. So then, this one's very straightforward. National referendum. This empowers the entire national organization, the entire membership of DSA, to enact legislative changes through referenda. So currently, legislative changes and changes to the platform and priorities of the organization are handled every 2 years at the National Convention. If this constitutional language were changed, then there would be referenda authorized. A referendum would be called if 1% or 1,000 members sign a petition to authorize it. Referendum can override convention resolutions. And then in order for a vote to be binding, it would have to have 10% of the membership vote in the election to enact it. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be binding. So, I mean, direct democracy is great. But something like this would allow a very organized minority of the membership to override things that happen at the convention. I can also see potentially a lot of these resolutions or a lot of these referenda being called because 1,000 people is not a huge barrier to cross. I mean, it's my understanding that there are at least 4 or 5 national caucuses that have 1,000 members in them. So, I mean, if the caucuses just really got angry with each other, you could see dueling referenda to the point that it'd be impossible for the National Political Committee to do anything else. So, but on the other hand, it'd be great to have the organization be more responsive. And there are other proposals in here for increasing DSA's overall responsiveness beyond the 2-year gap between conventions. So next up, adding candidate membership to the National Political Committee. So currently, when there's a vacancy on the National Political Committee, the committee fills that vacancy itself. Since 2019, there have, I believe, been 4 vacancies in our current National Political Committee. So 4 of the committee members elected at the last convention have stepped down, and they have been replaced by the committee itself. This proposes that the 4 candidates who fell short of being elected to the NPC be candidate members of the NPC. They would not have voting rights on the NPC, but they would fill vacancies in the order of votes that they received. So that would make the organization or make the composition of the NPC more closely match the voting results of a DSA convention. And then next up, electing DSA's national director. Currently, the national director is elected by the NPC and is not a member of the NPC. This changes it so that the national director would be elected by the convention for 2-year terms and would serve as a voting member of the NPC. This would change the director from being someone who is hired and fired by the NPC, solely responsible to the NPC, to being responsible to the organization as a whole, or to the organizational will as expressed at the convention every 2 years. So I think that the case for this is that democratic accountability is a good thing. And the case against it is that it turns the national director into sort of a president of the DSA. And I can see certain political tendencies being uneasy with that sort of change to the organization structure. Next up, this is it's kind of a clunky name for it. National leadership elected by and accountable to DSA members. This, instead of having the committee fill vacancies or using the top 4 vote getters who were not elected at the previous convention, this creates special elections to fill vacancies in the NPC. Like our chapter, if there's a vacancy on the NPC more than 6 months out from a convention, then the NPC would organize a special election. This also creates a roll call vote record on how NPC members vote. Currently, those records are not really kept and published. There's a, I don't know if it's been kept up to date, but there used to be an NPC vote tracker that essentially tried to figure out which members associated with which caucus voted which way on different questions, but it was very clunky and it misidentified several members in terms of the caucuses with which they're affiliated. Because the members had been affiliated with different caucuses in the past, and the members who switched caucuses were not the ones who were on Twitter, so no one knew what caucus anyone was in, and it was very confusing. And the effort to sort of create transparency ended up creating some drama. So while that was fun, it's not necessarily the best thing for the organization. So next up, establishing a national organizing committee. This creates a persistent legislature for DSA in the form of a 100-member national organizing committee. The NPC is authorized to increase but not decrease the size of this national organizing committee. NPC members would also be national organizing committee members. The national organizing committee can alter DSA bylaws between conventions and add items to convention agendas with a 2/3 vote. Quorum for the 100-member organization would be 50 members, and the National Organizing Committee would have the authority to review and override NPC decisions when it meets quarterly. So this makes DSA more responsive outside of a referendum process by creating these quarterly meetings of this National Organizing Committee, which functions as the sort of interim between conventions as the supreme legislative body of DSA. And it radically increases the complexity of the organization. So this next one is to hold all leadership elections by single transferable vote. Currently, DSA chapters hold our elections however we want, and elections for the National Political Committee, those procedures are open to change at conventions. There was a parliamentary maneuver at the last convention to either switch to or switch from something called Borda, which is different from single transferable vote in some way that I was never able to understand. But this resolution requires single transferable voting method to be used for all elections at the National Convention and also all elections within DSA chapters. So this would essentially override our bylaws or standing rules or whatever else we would potentially establish to be our electoral procedure in favor of a nationally standardized vote tallying method, which single transferable vote in theory is the best way to democratically decide how to handle elections, but this does restrict chapters from using other voting methods, including those that potentially assess higher weights to candidates who are, or voters who are from historically marginalized constituencies, and it imposes some infrastructure challenges because single transferable vote requires more effort to get the tallies done than first past the post does. So then next up is defining the role of DSA's national political platform. So currently the platform is a statement of the organization's general intent that doesn't really bind members. After this change, to be a member in good standing with DSA would require someone to accept the platform to maintain that membership. which this change explicitly does not mean that it mandates that members agree with every point of the platform, merely that members recognize the platform as the overall expression of our movement's aims. So this would make the platform more important and would encourage people to put some more thought into the platform between conventions and make adopting and changing the platform more of a serious issue. But this does potentially alienate some socialist tendencies. So those are all of the constitutional changes.
Can you elaborate on alienating some socialist tendencies?
I think that less authoritarian or the least authoritarian tendencies may have a problem publicly committing themselves to the platform. I think there are some people who would prefer not to have to sort of sign their names up to any kind of public statement. There are members of DSA who are, I don't want to use the word paranoid, but they very much feel that they would not be safe if they were publicly identified with the organization or with any socialist organization, be that because they are from marginalized communities or face other forms of economic precarity in ways that members from non-marginalized communities don't. I can see the difficulty of maintaining anonymity alienating for some people. There was one member elected to the National Political Committee who I believe stepped down specifically because they could not use a pseudonym to maintain their or could not be identified solely through a pseudonym, and there would have to be information about them published. So that's where I think that could be alienating to some people.
Okay, thanks.
Just as a bit of information, I did the pre-conference yesterday, or the pre-convention conference yesterday, and I gathered that, so I guess DSA, so one thing to keep in mind for all of these resolutions too is like all of this that we're doing now, we're still like a brand new organization if you think about it, like even though it has existed for like a long time, like it hasn't existed to the tune of like 94,000 members, right? Like, and then last time even it was like what, 50,000 I think, and then the time before that it was like 5,000 or 6,000 as far as convention times go. What I had learned was that we haven't had like an official like platform TM before, and so this is going to be like the first time that we're drafting like a full on platform in the way that it's being drafted, I guess. So I don't know what that means like in particular. I mean, I know like the last time I voted on what was called a platform, but it was just kind of a list of our like priorities that was set via resolutions. But this time they're like developing a full on like platform, and I don't know if you've seen that or not, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that up here as it relates to this last one, because I think what this does is establishes like an official platform, unlike what we've had before.
I didn't know there was that distinction. Because I remember seeing stuff about the platform like 2 years ago. I didn't realize, I guess, what all it entailed or didn't entail.
Yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs, but what I had learned was that there is some kind of distinction.
I was surprised that there was no constitutional amendment suggestion or proposed constitutional amendment to remove the language about expelling members subject to the discipline of a democratic centralist organization. As much heat as that generated on Twitter, it does not seem that there were 100 members willing to sign on to that.
Yeah, it's funny. Everything that I've heard is that like what happens on Twitter is not like anything like what the membership of the actual organization is like, even like all the drama and stuff. So that is really funny because I do remember that being like in like it was like an all-encompassing argument and debate, and like it turned out that people don't care about it that much. So and I think really like the people who would be on the receiving end of that, which I guess this is me giving my opinion, which is like what we're experiencing now as an organization. I think it's probably good to keep that in there, but that's outside of any of these resolutions or anything.
That is the language in the national, I believe it's in the DSA Constitution, allowing the expulsion of any member found to be subject to the discipline of a democratic centralist organization, which would be a traditional Marxist-Leninist party or a Trotskyite party. Democratic centralism, as I understand it, is the idea that within the party there can be all kinds of democratic debate and disagreements over the direction that the party should be moving, but the party presents a unified front to the outside. And that language, as I understand it, is in DSA's constitution because of the disruptive antics of organizations like individuals like Lyndon LaRouche and other ostensibly
historically it's
socialist.
Trotskyist organizations.
Yes, generally Trotskyists and generally sort of small Trotskyite splinter groups, but then also in more recent times, organizations like Red Guards Austin, which is ostensibly Maoist and has been very disruptive to the Austin DSA chapter.
Right, and it's not necessarily that if someone is a member of both organizations that they're automatically kicked out. It's just that if they are, if they behave in a way where they are in DSA specifically to like accomplish their other organization's goal. So like they're under the leadership of a centralist organization, which another important thing with centralism is that once the party makes a decision, that you cannot publicly oppose that decision and you have to sign up and help carry it out. Like you don't have the option to not carry it out. Otherwise you could be removed from it. And then also just to add context, that's what socialist alternative is. I mean, I'm not, that's not my opinion. They're explicitly a centralist Trotskyist organization. So just saying that.
Did anything else strike anyone about these proposed constitutional changes?
You guys mind if I come back through them? I just kind of want to see them again. Okay, just
Like
throwing
that.
back out there again. Oh no, wait, almost. I can just put them up there, and if anybody wants to say anything about them as they come up, go for it. I found this one interesting about the requirements for national conventions. Why that would be a big deal to someone to make a point of it, I found interesting. Obviously, it'd be nice for us if it was in Chicago, but the idea of like a central location is kind of funny to me, because like central to whom, you know?
But you could also make the case, and I'm not necessarily making that case, that like, when you think about where the vast majority of membership is, like wherever that is, right? So like if you select a location where none of the major like areas where we have a like a huge amount of membership are at, it's like a significant amount of resources to get everybody there, right? I guess if you were to think about it that way, but I mean, that's going to be the case to whatever degree anyway. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's taking a resources, making a resources opinion about this one, but I don't know. It feels like these costs on a whole number of them are like, I don't know, just made up.
I think it'd be great if, I generally like the idea of the regional, but I think a point was made earlier, like if it's not really helping the local chapter, then, that's supposed to be one of the benefits to doing them regionally, then, and that's not happening. But I guess I'd like to see, like, if you have however many people go to the convention, if you spend like a day or a half a day, like in that city, like knocking doors or like, holding some kind of like public event to raise awareness about DSA. If there's an event going on, you could table it or go and knock doors, or have some ad buys committed to the convention timeframe to like promote the idea of democratic socialism, or something like that. And that way, so you get a lot of people in a room like that or one area, like you can accomplish a lot. Like you can 150 people, you can go like knock lots of doors and like hand out lots of literature and have lots of conversations with just everyday people, if you just even have a half a day or a full day just focused on that. But maybe I can propose that at the next convention.
Oops. Yep, that's all of them. I was just going through, see if anything else popped up that I wanted to say, or if anybody else had anything else they wanted to say.
I'd be curious about the discussion, I think, on this one. Because if the, what's the title? The executive director? No, maybe that's not this one. The one
Yeah,
that, yeah, the one that where the national director is going to be part of the NPC. I mean, are they still under contract at that point? Or are they just like national director for life?
I don't know.
I mean, because it's really hard to be like, if you're on a committee with somebody,
Is that this one?
but you also decide whether they're going to get
Did I go past
their
it?
contract renewed or not. That's not really a committee of equals. Was the national director not Maria?
Yeah, I think it is Maria.
I lost it.
Yeah, it's Maria.
So every 2 years, she basically gets her contract renewed.
Basically. I don't even know what the national director is responsible for,
This
to be
one.
quite honest.
Directing the nation.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what Maria does. If it's like sharing one of our pages Facebook posts like a couple times a year, then she's doing a good job.
She writes all the emails, man.
Yeah.
She does write all the emails, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, she was at the training thing we went to St. Louis that one time. I assume she helps organize those and helps all the regional trainers. And I don't know, but it's a good question. Maybe the convention should also kind of like provide a description, your job description as well.
Yeah, that was kind of the frustrating thing about this one, is that it had less information than some of the other resolutions and constitutional proposals in terms of the overall rationale. The most detailed constitutional change proposal is actually the one to let the NPC decide where the convention is.
This is sort of like putting the city manager on the city council.
But becoming elected.
Yeah, right.
It's like, it's going from city manager to mayor, basically.
Yeah, it's like putting somebody who's an employee. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just using Sierra Club as an example, Michael, what's his name? Michael Braun, he was the executive director or whatever, but he answers to the Sierra Club board, which is all made up of volunteers. And then if you put him on that board, and then I guess then he also got to vote on whether his contract got renewed or not. Like, I don't know. It seems off, I think.
Well, there wouldn't be a contract anymore. That position would be elected.
Well, it's elected now, though, isn't it?
No. Right now, it's just they're hired by the NPC, so they're hired and fired by the NPC. So like if a new NPC came in as it currently is, they could replace her with someone else.
Well, okay, the language here on this slide says that they're elected by the NPC. Oh, they're not elected by the DSA as a whole, is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My language on this slide is intended to, it should say selected, not elected, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure they have some kind of decision-making structure to decide who they're going to hire and not hire. But
Yeah.
yeah, this will be curious.
I thought the one about basically, it's not abolishing the NPC, but it's like creating that legislature one. There was one last convention that was similar. I forget what it was called. It was called like a Congress of Delegates or something. But
The Committee of Locals?
Was that what it was?
I think that's what it was called.
Yeah, it was like every local would have a representative. At least, like every local would have one representative, I think, is how it was. But it would have abolished the NPC, but that was like a big fail last time. So it's like this one seems to be modified where it doesn't abolish the NPC, but it does remove like a good portion of their power.
Yeah, but it also doesn't like have a provision that the 100 member is like equitably and equally distributed across the organization. Like, I'm guessing you could have 100 members from New York City if you wanted. The way it is written, unless there's more detail on that.
There is a lot more detail. And I got to be honest, my eyes just kind of glazed over when I tried to read through it.
Some of them are like that. Some of these are definitely way better designed than others in terms of like digestibility and everything else. like I said, I really liked how that labor one was laid out because it was a lot of information, but they broke it up in chunks that you could understand. Be like, okay, this is what this does, and not all of them are like that. Some of them are just like a bunch of information.
Yeah, the abolishing the National Political Committee was kind of a meme phrase after the 2017 convention, because the NPC that was elected in 2017 was dysfunctional in many ways. And the NPC elected in 2019 has been much more effective and has, I don't know that they've necessarily put more effort into being transparent, but they've definitely achieved more in terms of transparency.
Yeah, one of the arguments that I've heard is that basically this, well, and I think this is actually tied to that stipend. I think this is one of the arguments made in that stipend resolution that we went over last time, but that the size and structure of the NPC is exactly the same as it was, like even when we had like 5,000 members. So like it hasn't expanded, and like these are people who are all volunteer, right, in charge of like doing all of this work, and that you know, they are overworked, like majorly. Like they just do not have the ability to get everything done because they have to work full-time jobs as well, you know, or at least do other things for income. Whereas some of this stuff requires like, I mean, it's like another full job outside of whatever you do for your income, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I feel like as the years go by and the conventions pass, like if there's not an expansion, it just becomes if we continue to grow, it just becomes a more and more difficult task.
I mean, think about that from 2017 to 2021 convention. Like the size and structure of the NPC has not changed, and the membership has grown like 25 times.
Rob, do you know if this is like a popular one?
No, it was very difficult to find anything about the constitutional changes.
Yeah.
My sense is that this one is probably not that popular, just because I think if it was, there would be like louder opposition to it. Because I do think there are a number of flaws with the way that it's designed. I don't think it's appropriate, if the convention is still going to be the highest legislative body, to empower the National Organizing Committee to alter the bylaws and sort of unilaterally decide the convention's agenda. I feel like it's kind of silly to have the National Organizing Committee include the National Political Committee, but then also be authorized to override the NPC. I feel like they should either be different things, or you should just like increase the size of the National Political Committee, or potentially like refine the current National Political Committee to be sort of a standing committee that it functions sort of as an executive committee for the organization as a whole, with a larger executive committee attached to it. This National Organizing Committee seems very clunky to me.
I'll put up these last couple. Anyone wants to say anything about them? We kind of already talked about this one. I think that's it. I think we've reached the conclusion.
That's great. Thanks for putting this together.
Yep.
I was just gonna ask for reasons, since it's us four, are we still committed to doing games or? What's up with that?
I need to jump.
Yeah, we don't have to.
Right. Okay, cool.
We have more people, I would, but nah, don't really feel obligated to. Or compelled to.
Nice.
All right, thanks again, guys. I'll see you sometime soon, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep, have a good day.
See ya. We're
All right, thanks for
meeting.
doing-
Yeah. I was just gonna say.